Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the world of gig economy. Now, a major shift in the employment trends has been the rise of a gig economy globally. Gig economy is a free market system in which organizations hire or contract workers for a short span of time. According to a report by Boston Consulting Group, India's gig workforce comprises 15 million workers employed across industries such as software, shared services and professional services as well. An estimated 56% of new employment in India is being generated by the gig economy companies across both blue-collar and white-collar workforce. Another study indicates that gig economy is gaining foothold in Tier 2 and Tier 3 markets as well. Now, according to the Code on Social Security 2020, a gig worker is a person who performs or participates in work arrangements and earns from such activities outside of the traditional employer-employee relationship. In today's episode of Perspective, we will discuss and analyze the scope, implications and challenges for the gig economy in India. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you. Beginning with, we have with us Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya. He is the Editorial Director of Business Standard, who is joining us. Mr. Rajiv Mantri is also with us, founder and MD of Navam Capital. And Mr. S.K. Jindal, Chairman, Investment and Capital Markets, SOCHM, is also with us. Welcome, all of you gentlemen, to Sansad Television. Let me begin with you, Mr. Bhattacharya. Let's first start by, understanding a bit more about the concept of gig economy. I pointed out certain aspects and also, what a gig worker is vis-a-vis the Social Security Code 2020. But when we are looking at the, the overall concept of gig economy, globally and in India as well, where do we stand?
Well, I think gig economy has been of recent origin, in the sense that we have seen its growth and expansion coinciding with the increasing penetration of technology, and largely is associated with a work profile where it does not mean a job, but it is an assignment, and it does not have a long-term nature of assignment associated with a gig worker. A good gig worker, therefore, is not a part of the permanent cost structure of an outfit, but a gig worker comes in whenever he is available or whenever his requirement is there for any economic activity, whether it is a question of carrying a passenger from one point to another, or whether it is a question of fixing your electricity problem at home, or whether it is going to be delivering a food from the restaurant to your home. And taking beyond the immediate the significance of such gig workers is a large number in the post-COVID world. We have seen the rise and growth of the gig economy because many companies actually decided to move away from the employment structure to an assignment and project structure, where the employees were not really employees, but they were partners, and they were providing jobs and project services in return of a fixed amount of money. Now, in turn, what it means is that gig economy does not have the kind of the employer-employee structure in an economic enterprise, but more a structure of a contract assignment wherein there are no other costs involved. So therefore, in a gig economy and a gig worker, there's a big issue is that of social safety net. Just because it means lower cost for the employer does not mean that the gig worker can be left alone at his own.
On his own. That's That's a very important aspect, Mr. Bhattacharya, and we'll come back to that as well, because that's also a very important aspect of the discussion. But since you pointed out how the gig economy works, it looks like, it's entirely different from the traditional structure of, the way people used to work in companies, or the employer-employee relationship which you were referring to. Let's first also look at the sectors and where this is becoming more prevalent. And Mr. Mantri, I'd like to bring you in here. We're looking at a whole, gamut of sectors, enterprises involved across a number of services where gig workers seemingly are the in thing. And as I was pointing out, one of the reports, it's in both blue collar as well as white collar companies.
So I think fundamentally there are two drivers for this. The first driver is technological change, which has made contracting far easier, which is making it possible for freelancers to find work and for companies to sort of work closely with those who are not employees but contractors. So the first driver is technology, and in the Indian context and maybe in some other countries, the second driver is obviously stringent labor laws. So we've always, in some sense, had a gig economy where lots of companies elect, because of stringent labor laws, to have a contract-based labor force. Mm-hmm. So now that we are seeing changes on dramatic changes actually in both these vectors in India, we are seeing a wave of digitalization like we've never had, and we are seeing reforms on the labor front. I think there is both sort of a dual kind of factor at play, which is driving the rise of gig workers and of contract workers. And I don't necessarily think it's to the disadvantage. I think it's, in fact, in some cases, even advantageous for high sort of output knowledge workers have the option to sort of freelance in this fashion.
We'll come to that part as well, because it's just not the highly skilled workers perhaps which Mr. Bhattacharya was referring to as well, but we'll have to look at that in a holistic perspective. Before that, I'd like to bring in Mr. Jindal here. Mr. Jindal, from your perspective, now we're trying to understand what is gig economy, who are gig workers, what drives gig economy, and in our economic structure and in our economy as well, when we're talking about how crucial is this component?
As I look at, it's a very positive development, because in any market you need all types of flexibilities, all types of avenues to grow. This is another new type which we see, where you are not entering into a long-term thing, but you are entering into a short-term thing, and it is working very well. My own experience has been that it is working very well. Value for money, I would say. It is very flexible. You can explore on a small level, because if you keep a staff and after 3 months, 6 months, you decide this is not working well. But if you keep a specialist and he gives you that particular time which you require, because you always don't need full-time staff for certain things. So there is no need to have full-time. You can have consultant for that. Mm-hmm. You can have a part-time person for that. So that is where gig worker comes in, and it is a in-between thing between a regular one and no job. If regular one, traditional one is very expensive. So labor laws and all those things you have to follow, etc.
Okay.
One example, my wife wanted to learn music. We found one, and she is working for the last 1 year during this Corona time. The relationship is going very good. And on value for money thing, she doesn't have to come home. She's working from there on virtually, and both are happy. So these kind of things, and especially in the IT jobs, software jobs, writing jobs.
Okay.
Suppose you want something to be written. If you hire somebody on a gig worker basis, it works very well.
Okay.
Freelancers, they have the flexibility at their own convenience. They can do what you want, and they get paid for it, and you are paying only for that particular thing.
Okay.
So it works for both sides. Value for money, as I said in the beginning.
Okay. Okay. So it's a win-win situation for both sides, as you're pointing out, Mr. Jindal. There. Well, let's look at one more aspect before we come to the question or the challenges which Mr. Bhattacharya was referring to, and that is, Mr. Mantri, I'd like to bring in here. The recent trend shows that this is also gaining momentum in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, or tier 2, tier 3 markets as well. So is it just the technology or technological changes which is driving this particular, shift, or the need as well? Because perhaps you do not have that much skilled workforce in tier 2, tier 3 markets.
No, so it's both. So, obviously, tier 2, tier 3 markets are also seeing sweeping kind of connectivity. They are seeing a kind of connectivity and availability of things on the internet. For example, e-commerce has penetrated across the country. So that logistics requirement or that delivery requirement, for which the gig economy workers are a big part, is also being seen over there. And I see it as a very positive development, where we need sort of all modes of employment, as Mr. Jindal pointed out. It need not be a job for life, but there could be workers who come in, who spend a few years doing this and then move on to something else. In any case, my view is that the job for life is like a relic of the industrial era and disappearing fast across the world. So I don't think in this particular phase that we are in, we will have that kind of a thing anymore. Okay. Where someone joins a company and spends decades in that company. That's probably not going to happen, or it's going to happen less and less.
Okay. Let's now move to that aspect which Mr. Bhattacharya was referring to. Mr. Bhattacharya, you're talking about the challenges of a gig economy, and let's be very practical here. Let's understand. I believe all of us are on this page that gig economy is beneficial. It is giving more opportunities to the youngsters, to the population, to those who have some sort of skills to try and find work of their choice, and it's beneficial to the other party as well, who wants to use those skills for a particular period of time. But the challenges which you're referring to, Mr. Bhattacharya, if you could elaborate upon them in terms of what are we looking at so that those challenges can be tackled.
Sure. No, a couple of clarifications here. Number one is that I do not think it is a win-win deal. A gig economy is not a win-win deal in the current scheme of things.
Okay.
It is a win for the person who is giving the assignment. It is not a win for the person who is getting the assignment. That is because the framework for the gig economy is yet to evolve into a structure where the worker who offers the service has the basic rights of compensation, the basic rights of the treatment that he deserves, because it is a one-sided deal in a situation in a market like India. That is number one. Mm-hmm. Number two is that it may be, nobody is asking for work for a lifetime, but certainly everybody, every young person wants a kind of assignment that also takes care of something by which he can live for the future.
Okay.
Now, the current gig economy has no provision for anything by which a portion of the salary that he gets cornered and gets earmarked for his future savings.
Okay.
Everything is as if there is no tomorrow. Everything is today. Now, I don't think that in any economy, whether it is industrial or post-industrial or digital, will ever survive if the workers do not get enough which is kept by way of provisioning for tomorrow. Now, which is why the labor code, in the labor code, which is the wage code of the safety, does provide for the social safety net provision for gig economy workers also. And I think it's a very welcome move. And as Mr. Jindal was pointing out, because labor laws were stringent, people are going in for gig economy. So I think this entire approach to gig economy is somehow flawed, because gig economy allows the employers to employ people on terms that are beneficial to only one side.
Okay.
And whereas in a gig economy, the service provider is probably not at an advantage, not in a position to negotiate better terms, and particularly for the compensation package for the future.
Okay.
Because you may not be getting a job for life, but you do need to save for
how
future.
does that a social security net which you're referring to, Mr. Bhattacharya, as per the labor code works?
I think that code has to operate, and the code has been passed by Parliament, but it is yet to be notified. And once it is notified, you have to see in what way the gig economy prospers and responds to the challenges of providing social safety net for the gig economy workers. So my prognosis is that once gig economy comes under the labor code, which has been passed by Parliament and which is yet to be notified, my reading is that gig economy will go through the same trials and tribulations that the traditional jobs and labor market has gone through.
Okay.
So one has to wait before you pass your final judgment on the verdict on the future of gig economy.
Okay, indeed, there is a long way to go, and there will be challenges on the way as well. There has to be checks and balances also being put in place. Mr. Mantri, two aspects. Would you agree with what Mr. Bhattacharya is referring to? Of course, to say that any situation is going to be a win-win situation for both sides would perhaps be a utopian one, as Mr. Bhattacharya is referring to. But in terms of, the benefits for the worker in the gig economy, that is the gig worker whom we are referring to, the social safety, social security benefits, or the long-term, or at least perhaps mid-term, outlook there, vis-a-vis the career, or vis-a-vis, the amount of money he or she gets, in terms of ensuring that there is a social safety. Do you agree that there has to be a mechanism which is there, and once notified, it will come into effect?
No, most definitely there should be occupational safety and health, as well as some form of safety net for all workers, whether they are contractors or permanent. Having said that, on that point of requiring, I guess maybe Mr. Bhattacharya, I think was, if I understand him correctly, he was referring to provident fund contributions or those kind of retirement contributions that permanent workers get from companies.
Yeah.
Well, I think the reality today is most young people prefer to have cash in hand, and they want that cash compensation in their own control, not necessarily going to the hands of a provident fund account. So I think there are certain changes that are happening, which the market and policymakers should account for. And while we need the safety net and occupational safety guidelines to apply for all kinds of workers, be they contract or non-contract, we should be mindful that too much top-down design can be harmful. And to that extent, as the rules for the labor codes will be notified by the states, so Parliament has already done its job. The union government has done its job. Now we are waiting for the states to kind of accept the labor codes and implement them with the rules. So let's see what form the labor codes take in each state. There will be some state level variations, and out of that kind of manthan, some kind of new ideas should come out, which may be good to deploy at a wider scale in the country.
Okay. Mr. Jindal, your views there on the issue of having a social safety net for gig workers, which is essential for any worker in whatever mode he or she might be working. It would have to be obviously different from the traditional format or traditional method of social security net in the regular employment jobs, of course, because this is a new world of employment opportunities with new rules and new requirements as well.
You see, I tell you, I have little difference of opinion with Ashok ji, though I have very high respect for him. You see, here is a case where optimum utilization on both sides are happening, worker and employee, both sides. maximum exposure, maximum experience he will gain in that small time, because the options are too many for gig worker. When he joins a company and suppose company gives the salary but doesn't give him enough work, then he's losing his time because he's not gaining any experience there. So that way also it works very well. Efficiency is the name of the game, and only efficient system will work. Had this system not been good for both, had this system not been win-win for both, this kind of momentum you could not have seen.
Okay.
This is my estimation of this momentum. You see here, we are one of the country, we are at 5th number in the world. There are other countries also where this is running successfully. And today's worker, suppose he in the first few years, 3, 4, 5 years, he has worked as a gig worker, then he gains so much of experience that he is ready to become an owner, and then he can hire gig workers or other regular conventional workers also.
Okay.
So this experience, this exposure at this age of 25 or 30 or 35 is very, very important, and this gives them the exposure which is required to make a very sound footing and very strong foundation.
Okay.
They see the world in a very short time. In a normal company, you hardly get that kind of exposure.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Bhattacharya, do you agree with this argument, and there seems to be some strong, footing there, because what Mr. Jindal seems to be referring to and what Mr. Mantri is also pointing out is that let's look at gig economy or the opportunities in gig economy as a launchpad, as a platform, as a launchpad, for perhaps future, full-time employment or entrepreneurship abilities as well. Of course, during this launchpad period also, there should be social safety net, which is a part of the labor code.
My point is that I am not at all saying that the gig economy is not something good. I think gig economy is definitely serving a need of the economy at this stage of this economic activity. But what I am trying to highlight is that in a gig economy, the workers themselves may not want, as Mr. Mantri is pointing out, today's young workers do not want provident fund and retirement benefits, but an enlightened society, an enlightened work environment should actually make sure that every gig worker also has a portion of his compensation package which is kept for future providence. And I think an enlightened society should really make sure, and I think this is the reason why the social safety net is so very important, even for the gig economy. Please remember that globally also, the movement towards on the gig economy is treating the gig economy worker as a conventional workers. There are court judgments in United Kingdom, there are court judgments in United States, which actually have conferred the rights of an ordinary workers to even the partners in a taxi aggregators. So therefore, the trend globally is that yes, gig economy is important, gig economy is good for the economy, but you need to take care of their social safety requirements for their future providential requirement. Compensation packages should build that package into them. So without that, the gig economy may actually do very well for a short time, but it may collapse under the weight of the lack of social safety. This is my reading.
Okay, there it is. Thank you so much, Mr. Bhattacharya and Mr. Jindal, as well as Mr. Mantri, for sharing your views and insight with our viewers. As our experts were pointing out, all about the world of gig economy, how the gig workers are working, how does it benefit the companies which employ them or the individuals which employ their services, and what is in it for the gig workers, and of course, the challenges as were being pointed out by Mr. Bhattacharya in terms of the social safety net and how those challenges can be tackled going ahead. We'll come back again with a different topic. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.